Prison is supposed to be a place where criminals pay the price and learn how to change. But there's a horrifying truth. Some punishments aren't written in any law at all. They're brutal tortures, secret acts of revenge carried out behind bars, where a victim can be tormented to death in agony. Some are attacked in ways that make your spine go cold just hearing about it. Some are locked in freezing conditions for days. Some become targets of terrifying homemade weapons. So how did those stories unfold? Let's begin. In this video, we'll walk through the most chilling stories hidden behind prison doors, where rehabilitation is sometimes just a pretty word on paper. In reality, before anyone can even dream of redemption, many have to learn a harsher lesson first: how to survive. You'll see the unwritten rules running the cell blocks, where the strong rule through fists and humiliation. You'll also witness a kind of punishment so cold-blooded it comes from the very people in power inside the prison. And finally, we'll look at attacks carried out with dangerous tools smuggled in or made inside, leaving victims in unimaginable pain. If you're brave enough, follow every twist right now. You think going to prison is just eating bland food and waiting for your sentence to end? No. In many places, prison is like another world, where written rules are only half the story, and the unwritten rules decide whether you live or die. The moment you step in, you have to understand this. Before you become a better person, you have to learn how to survive under watchful eyes, invisible traps, and people willing to turn you into entertainment. And Ta Polo prison is the most terrifying proof of that, a place for serious offenders where every day feels like a battle. If you want me to keep telling the Ta Polo story with a truly chilling plot twist style, comment 0 under the video. Afaru Buaky took his first steps into Ta Polo prison, a place reserved for the worst offenders, people who would likely spend the rest of their lives behind iron bars. Afaru was young, tall, strong-built, and his eyes always looked like they were challenging the entire world. But that attitude was like a sign hanging over his head, because in prison, a newcomer who acts tough is usually the first one tested. Afaru understood the rules here perfectly. If you want peace, you choose a side. Either bow your head or become prey. And Afaru hated kneeling more than anything. He didn't come here to survive in silence. He came to become a force. Afaru began preparing the way prison teaches you to prepare. He didn't talk much, didn't befriend people blindly, and never let anyone read what he was thinking. By day, he watched quietly. Who ran the place, who liked bullying the new guys, who acted as an informant to the guards. At night, as the cell slowly sank into heavy breathing, Afaru forced himself to train. Push-ups until his shoulders burned, lifting homemade weights, wrapping cloth around his hands and punching the wall until he got used to pain. Every bruise was a reminder. In Ta Polo, strength isn't for showing off, it's for staying alive. He tried to avoid crowds, tried to dodge every stare, but the quieter he became, the more he drew the attention of the senior inmates who loved testing rookies with violence. And the day of that test came faster than he expected. One morning in the yard, Afaru stepped out and immediately felt it. Something was off. A few eyes latched onto him, soft laughter floating in the air like they were waiting for a show. Then a group of inmates broke off and surrounded him in a tight circle. From the middle of the crowd, a notorious older inmate walked forward. Face like stone, voice like an order: "Kneel, submit to me, and you might live." In Ta Polo, that wasn't a threat. It was a notice. But Afaru didn't back down. He took one step forward, clenched the fists he'd hardened through endless training, and let his eyes speak plainly. He would never kneel. And the moment he threw the first punch, the entire yard felt like it exploded. Because this was no longer hazing the new guy, it had become a real fight for survival. If you want me to tell you how Afaru turned the tables, comment 9 under the video. Afaru charged in like a machine. He didn't swing wildly, he fought exactly the way he'd practiced in the dark, fast, clean, and with full force. The first guy rushed him and took a straight punch that sent him stumbling. The second tried to trap his arm and immediately ate a kick to the leg, collapsing to the ground. The rest froze for half a beat, because they didn't expect a rookie to be this tough and this fearless. Even the senior inmate watching from the outside looked briefly shaken. Because prison rules are always the same. Once you prove you're not easy to swallow, people start calculating the cost. And that's exactly what happened. After a few minutes of chaos, the circle broke apart. Afaru stood in the middle of the yard, breathing hard, his hands smeared with blood from the impact, but he didn't fall. From that day on, the air around him changed. Fewer taunts, fewer shoulders bumping him on purpose. Afaru thought he'd carved out a safe zone, until a new mistake appeared right inside his own cell. After a sports match, Afaru returned to the cell, exhausted, wanting nothing more than to drop onto his bed, the slab that felt like wood. But the second he stepped through the door, he stopped cold. On Afaru's bed, his territory, someone was sprawled out like he owned the place, legs up, eyes half closed. It was a new inmate, smaller in build, named Afaru Buaky. The whole room went dead silent, because everyone knew. In prison, taking the wrong spot can be worse than an insult. Afaru swallowed his rage and warned him straight. "Get up, that's my bed." But Afaru only cracked one eye open, curled his lip into a mocking grin, and tossed out a lazy sentence. "Move. I'm sleeping." And in that exact moment, the air in the cell felt strangled, because everyone understood. Blood was about to spill. Afaru didn't say another word. He stepped in and yanked Afaru off the bed like dragging a sack onto the concrete floor. The first punch landed so fast most people only heard that dry thud before they saw Afaru stagger. Then the second, the third. Afaru hit him like he was teaching a lesson about the law of the bed in prison. The crowd started to roar, whistles rising like they were watching a free boxing match. Everyone thought the ending was obvious, a giant versus a smaller man. Afaru would only lie there and take it. But Afaru didn't. Panic flashed in his eyes as he thrashed like a cornered animal, searching for any way out. And that desperation pushed him into a choice nobody expected. A move so dirty, so ruthless, it flipped the entire fight in a single second. While Afaru was raining punches down, Afaru suddenly sprang upward like a coiled spring snapping back. He didn't choose a normal counter, because he knew he was weaker. Instead, Afaru went straight for a dangerously vulnerable spot, a filthy kind of resistance that was brutally effective. Afaru's scream tore through the cell, and the crowd that had been cheering went instantly silent. Afaru staggered, clamping his hands over his lower body, his face drained white, blood beginning to spread across the concrete. He tried to strike back in blind panic, but the more he fought, the tighter Afaru clung on, like a man with nothing left to lose. Just seconds ago, Afaru had been the one overpowering everything. And now he collapsed in a way no one could even imagine. And the entire cell stood frozen, because they just witnessed a raw truth. In prison, sometimes the winner isn't the strongest, it's the one willing to go all the way. Afaru dropped to his knees, his body curling inward from pain and blood loss, both hands still clamped over his lower body, an animal, last-second instinct to hold on to life. The crowd that had been roaring just moments ago scattered in panic, because no one wanted to get dragged into it once the guards showed up. Seconds later, the thud of running boots stormed in. Officers rushed to the scene and yanked Afaru away, but everything had already slipped beyond control. Afaru was taken out for emergency treatment in critical condition, and the cell sank into a freezing silence. The kind of silence that only appears when everyone understands one thing. In prison, some mistakes aren't paid for with injuries. They're paid for with your life. And just as everyone feared, no miracle came. Afaru didn't make it. A huge man, someone who had just taken down a whole pack of senior inmates in the yard, ended up dying because of one flash of rage, and one counterstrike aimed too perfectly at the worst possible moment. Word of his death spread through the facility like a living warning. In prison, muscle doesn't always decide everything, and carelessness can open the door to tragedy in seconds. Afaru was dragged to court and given more time for the brutal assault. But that sentence couldn't fill the hole Afaru left behind, nor erase the nightmare burned into the eyes of everyone who saw it happen. From that day on, the men in that cell block cheered less whenever a fight broke out because they'd learned, there are no referees here, no clear rules, and the ending is usually just one thing: blood. And as this story closes, a new question rises up. If inmates can be this terrifying, then how terrifying can the guards' power become? Because if prisoners inside a cell can kill each other over something as small as a bed, Then out in the corridors there's an even more frightening force. The guards. They don't need fists to give orders, they have keys, authority, and 100 ways to make someone behave in silence. In many places, if you don't cooperate, don't obey, or simply annoy the wrong person, you can be pushed into punishments that never make it into any official logbook. And one of the most haunting is the cold room, where the cold doesn't make you shiver. It grinds down your will, grinds down your body, until you don't even have the strength to call for help. The next story belongs to Anthony Michel, a 33-year-old inmate who entered the jail hoping for medical care, but was thrown straight into hell. On May 12, 2023, Anthony Michel, 33, was booked into Walker County Jail in a state of severe mental distress, thin, fragile, and terrified. His family begged the jail to provide medical support, and they were met with reassurances that sounded by the book in the coldest way. Michel would be carefully looked after. But the moment the steel door slammed shut, everything veered into something ruthless. Instead of being placed in a normal housing unit and given real medical evaluation, Michel was thrown into an empty isolation cell. No bed, no belongings, nothing but a cold concrete floor and a toilet hole. And in the days that followed, he was repeatedly handled with violence and exposed to bitter, freezing conditions as a form of punishment. This wasn't inmate management anymore. This was human cruelty. It's unacceptable that people tasked with enforcing the law could twist power into a tool of torture. And if the system allows that to happen, then the system itself deserves to be condemned. Over the next days, Michel grew weaker and weaker. He was kept isolated in that frigid room, his panicked mind given no comfort. His body denied even the bare minimum conditions to recover. At one point, Michel was dragged out of his cell, restrained roughly, and subjected to forceful measures that left him convulsing and losing control. Then even his most essential personal items were tossed away like trash. After that, eating became difficult, and his strength collapsed even faster. The terrifying part is that everything played out like a routine. They didn't see him as a patient who needed help. They saw him as a prop, something to punish, to vent their anger on, or to turn into a warning for everyone else. And when a human being is pushed to the point where they're breathing on willpower alone, the next step is usually only one thing: collapse. Then the freezer room appeared like a sentence with no words. Michel was dragged away and thrown into a freezing storage room used for keeping food. No warm clothes, no shoes, no blanket, only air so cold it sliced into his skin like knives. At times the temperature dropped close to 0 Celsius. Michel trembled violently, teeth chattering, his hands and feet going numb until he could barely feel them. The nightmare wasn't a one-time thing either. He was locked in there for hours a day, again and again, day after day, while people outside looked in and laughed like it was entertainment. Cold doesn't always kill instantly. It kills slowly, draining strength, scrambling the mind, and pushing the body toward hypothermia, 1 minute at a time. And eventually, Michel barely had the power to stand. Barely had the breath left to call for help. But instead of being rushed to emergency care, he was left there. Like his life wasn't worth interrupting a shift. Around May 26, nearly 2 weeks after he was brought in, Michel was finally taken out. But by then, he was almost no longer a functioning human being. He was limp, slow to respond, his body ice cold as if it could no longer hold heat. Even during the transfer, the treatment stayed harsh and indifferent. When Michel fell from his wheelchair, he wasn't helped up with care. He was dragged back and strapped down, wrists and ankles locked, as if he still had the strength to resist. At the hospital, his vital signs dropped into the danger zone. Doctors tried to save him, but too much time had been wasted. And what enraged the public even more was that the initial reports were later accused of hiding the truth, trying to frame everything as natural or medical, while footage from inside the jail told a completely different story. When the evidence surfaced, multiple people connected to the case were sued and investigated. But for Michel, justice arrived far too late. Michel's case forced people to face a terrifying reality. In prison, death doesn't always come from other inmates. Sometimes it comes from abused power, power that can crush a person while still hiding behind the word procedure. But prison violence doesn't stop there. In an even darker layer, Inmates also invent ways to destroy each other that make your skin crawl just hearing about them. People whisper names like prison napalm, a dangerously sticky, burn-causing substance that has appeared in several shocking attacks. What's frightening isn't only the cruelty, it's the question. How can something like that exist in a place that's supposed to be tightly guarded? When hatred, jungle law, and management loopholes collide, prison stops being a place of rehabilitation and becomes a battlefield, where one careless night is enough to turn someone into a victim who never even gets the chance to scream. One case that sent shockwaves through prison circles was the story of an inmate convicted of an especially horrific crime. After the sentence was handed down, rage inside and outside the facility boiled over so intensely that rumors spread about a cash reward for anyone who could take him out. From that point on, he became a walking target, ambushed with blunt objects, attacked with sharp weapons, to the point the prison had to move him into a tighter, more controlled unit. But sometimes prison only changes the location of danger. It doesn't erase the danger itself. One night, after the unit lights went out, the men in his cell suddenly struck, using a blistering, sticky burning substance. The cruelty was in how it was used, not just to cause pain, but to ruin the victim completely. Guards and medical staff arrived fast, but what they saw was pure horror, a human being almost no longer recognizable. And that's exactly where the story twists into something even darker, because the real nightmare wasn't just the attack, it was what happened next. Cases like these force people to ask the question out loud: is prison really about rehabilitation, or is it quietly nurturing a savage kind of justice? And it wasn't just one incident. Attacks using sticky burning substances have been mentioned in multiple places as a lingering nightmare. In one case, a victim survived once and was transferred to a supposedly safer unit, only to be found again and attacked again, ending up hospitalized for days with severe burns. Their family kept pleading for stronger protection, but the overwhelming feeling was that everything was ignored until the consequences finally exploded. In another case, the attacker struck while the victim was doing something completely ordinary: someone reading in the yard, someone simply walking up a staircase. And within seconds, flesh was destroyed, faces disfigured, leaving lifelong damage even when the person survived. Later, the perpetrator received extra time, but no sentence can undo what happened. And the question still hangs in the air like a blade. How, in a place that's supposed to be tightly controlled, can inmates still turn hatred into a weapon and carry out cruelty on that level? From Ta Polo to Walker County to the burn attacks, everything leads to the same chilling conclusion. Prison doesn't only confine people, it exposes the most ruthless instincts in people. Inside the cell, the unwritten rules can turn a bed into a reason to kill. Outside in the hallways, power can be abused until discipline becomes torture. And in the darkness, hatred drives inmates to invent ways of destroying each other that have no humanity left in them. The most terrifying part is that these things are often only called by their real names after someone dies, when it's already too late to turn back. And what I've told you here is only a handful of representative fragments. Out there are worse cases, more calculated, more hidden, and sometimes quieter, because there isn't always a camera, and there isn't always evidence that makes it into the light. So the final question I want to leave you with is this: if prisons are built for rehabilitation, then who rehabilitates the very system that allows violence to thrive? If you want me to make a part 2 about other jungle laws inside prisons, tell me with a comment. But before we close, there's one thing that haunts me most. In these stories, victims rarely die from one blow. They die from a chain of indifference. The indifference of a crowd cheering while Afaru was dragged down like entertainment. The indifference of people in power who watched Michelle deteriorate and still treated it as a lesson. The indifference of an entire system when warning signs repeat again and again until someone finally collapses, and only then do investigations begin. Only then does anyone start talking about responsibility. Prisons are meant to stop evil, but sometimes they become places where evil is legalized by silence and authority. And that's why prison stories aren't terrifying only because of blood. They're terrifying because they remind us, without real oversight, without real humanity, iron bars don't protect justice. And here's what makes it even more frightening. Tragedies in prison are rarely isolated incidents. They're a loop. Violence sprouts from jungle rules, grows on indifference, then erupts when no one can stop it in time. When a facility lacks independent oversight, lacks proper medical care, and its management failures are covered up with polished reports, evil will always find a way to survive. The victim could be a weaker inmate, someone in mental distress, or simply anyone who doesn't cooperate at the wrong moment. And once you understand that, you realize prison isn't only where bad people are locked away, it's where the conscience of an entire system is put on trial. In the end, prison isn't terrifying only because of bars or how many years a sentence lasts, but because there are places where people are turned into objects, to vent anger on, to entertain others, or to make an example out of someone. Afaru died because he lost control for a single moment under the jungle rules of the cellblock. Michelle collapsed because cruelty was hidden behind the word discipline. And the other barbaric attacks prove one thing. When violence is tolerated, it will always find a way to multiply. If you want a part 2 with more chilling prison stories, still told in that drama, plot twist, life lesson style, leave a comment below and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. But if you think what I've told you so far is the deepest level of hell, no, not even close. There are prisons where punishment no longer lives in a judge's sentence, but in the hands of the person holding the keys, and sometimes in the eyes of the crowd watching. In the next part, I'll tell you about cases where victims had no chance to fight back at all. People who were disappeared from sight over a minor conflict, people pushed to the edge because they were treated as less than human, and moments when justice didn't arrive with a courtroom gavel, but with pure brutality. A prison door closes once, but the story behind it never truly goes quiet. And the most terrifying part is this. Stories like these aren't always recorded, and there isn't always someone brave enough to speak up. In prison, the truth is often buried under 3 layers: the victim's fear, the witness's silence, and by-the-book reports. All it takes is one line, nothing unusual, and a whole tragedy can be filed away as if it never existed. But that's exactly why every time the truth leaks out, through security footage, through documents, through survivors' testimony, it sends a chill through the public. It reveals that there are places where human beings can be treated with unimaginable cruelty and no one is held accountable right away. And part 2 will begin with one simple question. If prisons are built to control violence, then why is violence still able to bloom inside them?